Welcome back to Broken Beautiful Me. Every week we seek out the remarkable resilience found in the wake of profound brokenness. Today we have a story that doesn't just speak to survival, but to magnificent transformation. Our guest, Jennifer Chase, she's walked a path through the deepest shadows of addiction and emerged into a brilliant light of recovery and purpose. Her journey is a testament to the powerful truth that she shares. Addiction is not a life sentence, it's a detour that, with intentional redirection, can lead you to your truest self. Get ready to be captivated. In this episode, Jennifer takes us through the pivotal moments of her struggle, the rock bottom realization, and the beautiful intentional work of building a life reclaimed. This is an episode you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Just dive in with me, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me, stories of hope, gratitude, and resilience. Today, I'm honored to have as my guest Jennifer Chase. She's a life coach who works with individuals, families, and loved ones impacted by addiction, trauma, and grief. Her work is rooted in lived experience and a deep understanding of how unprocessed pain moves through family systems across generations. Jennifer is an addict in recovery, the daughter of an alcoholic, a childhood sexual abuse survivor, and the mother of a recovering addict. These experiences shaped her understanding of survival, shame, and the quiet grief that often goes unnamed. For many years, she carried the belief that she was the problem, a belief common among those raised in dysfunctional or addictive environments. Healing required learning how to tell the truth, set boundaries without guilt, and release responsibility for outcomes she could not control. Today, Jennifer helps others move out of survival mode and into grounded self-leadership. Her coaching focuses on emotional regulation, boundaries, grief, and helping people stay connected without abandoning themselves. She is known for her direct yet compassionate approach and her ability to hold space for hard conversations without judgment or false optimism. Jennifer believes healing does not require perfection, only honesty and willingness. Her work centers on helping people reclaim their lives while honoring the complexity of their stories. That's so beautiful. Welcome, Jennifer. I just feel so honored to have you here with me today.
Oh, I'm just so excited to be here.
So I guess I want to start at the beginning here to get for our listeners a full flow. Can you take us back to the time before your recovery truly began? And what kind of signs told you that you had this habit that was evolving and that you needed to take care of it?
Yeah, so my addiction started, like you said, I am a daughter of an alcoholic and a granddaughter of an alcoholic and a great-great-granddaughter of an alcoholic, right? Addiction runs really deep in my house and my home. And I knew without question, I wouldn't have been able to say to you, like, what are you going to be when you grow up? Are you going to have a family? Like, none of that. But I would have been able to tell you I'm not going to be an alcoholic. Like, I looked at my parents' and grandparents' inability to break the chains of addiction as pure weakness. And so I was hyper aware that I had the biology and that was not going to be me. But unfortunately, one Friday afternoon, I was diagnosed with a hemorrhaging brain tumor and given about 12 hours to live. And when they removed that brain tumor, they caused nerve damage in my head. And so it started me on my path to chronic pain. And I was introduced to opiates. And because I was one, being prescribed opiates. And so I believed that a doctor certainly knew what was happening, and, I should be taking these. But it really did. I was so focused on alcohol that it really did kind of come in and take my breath away. I share a story. About 2 weeks after having brain surgery, I was in my bedroom and I could hear my family playing out in the living room. And I said out loud, as though there were another 10 or 15 people in that room with me, "Where the hell has this been my whole life?" Like, in that moment, I finally felt like I could breathe. I finally felt like I fit in my skin. I finally, didn't care that I had just said goodbye to my family, or that, I had been sexually abused as a child. Like, all of those things, finally, after 29 years, I felt like I could take a deep breath. And that was kind of the journey to my substance problem. When I got sick, my kids were 2 and 5. And when I got sober, they were 18 and 21. And so a lot of things happened in those 14 years, or 15 years, if you will. At the beginning of this thing, substance was the solution to everything. It was the solution, right? And there were very few consequences and all benefits. And as we continued through this, obviously that pendulum started to switch, and I started to experience a lot more consequences. And I can't really answer your question without telling you that when my son was 17 years old, his senior year of high school, I found out that I had inadvertently become my son's drug dealer. And he too had become addicted to opiates, right? He had watched his mama kind of do life on, when life was good, she got high. When life was bad, she got high. And so as he started to struggle with his own mental health issues, substance became his solution as well. And so for me, I wish I could say the day that I found out that he was addicted to opiates, the opiates that were in the home because of me, I wish I could tell you that was the last day that I ever used, but that would not be truthful. It certainly was the beginning to the end, right? It was certainly the day that I will never forget, laying in bed that night thinking, how in the hell did we get here? From a place of, this is never going to be me, and my parents are just weak and they don't have any courage, to now I'm sitting here realizing that I actually became again, inadvertently, it wasn't on purpose, but inadvertently had been supplying these substances to my son. Like, I didn't know how we got here. And so that was the beginning to the end. Certainly the consequences had become many by that day, right? Like, my marriage, I had burned it down. At that point, I had been married for 21 years, and it was really just a marriage of paper, right? It had become, the power differential was so skewed at that point in my marriage. My husband, if he were sitting here, he'd tell you, like, he is the best enabler on the planet, right? And so we had just fallen into these new roles that he just made everything easier for me and took care of the kids. And I just had and it got complicated because I did have a medical diagnosis, right? I had been to the Mayo Clinic, and all of these, doctors around me were trying to find a solution for me, and they didn't have one. And so they just kept overprescribing in a time where overprescribing in America happened often, right? In the early 2000s. And so the consequences at the end of this thing were suffocating. And yet, when I walked into a treatment facility the day after my son graduated from high school, the mindset was not recovery and sobriety and wellness. The thought was, how do I start using like a gentle lady? How do I get so many drugs out of the house to save my son? How do I make it so that he can't get them as easy, right? Like, the mindset was still not recovery. The mindset was, how do I do this less? How do I get my tolerance down? Because I still was not interested in doing life without my security blanket, which had become substance.
So when was the moment that you said, okay, now I'm ready? Because I'm hearing you, what you're saying, how do I make this less so that I can manage the situation? Which I think I think that's a very natural response to have when you are, how can I rein this in,
Yeah.
but not have to
Yeah.
stop? Um, when did you realize that stopping was the path?
I was in a treatment facility. So again, the day after my son graduated from high school, I went into treatment to an inpatient facility. And I think I was there for about 4 days when there was a group facilitator standing up at a whiteboard. And she made a pretty, what I felt like at the time was kind of a rude comment. And she said that addicts just feel like they're victims. And I got very upset. And another counselor pulled me in her office and she said, "What's going on?" And I said, "I'll tell you, but this isn't like anything to do with like how I'm going to use like a gentle lady, why I'm here." Like, right. There's just no correlation. I'm just mad. And she's like, "Okay, what?" And I said, "Well, I was sexually abused as a child." And I will never forget as long as I live the look on her face when she said to me, "Baby girl, we cannot put that genie back in the bottle." And
Mm.
I didn't know what she meant, right? Because for me, the only person I had ever told outside of my mom was my husband. And my mom, when I shared it with her, didn't believe me, which is, pretty interesting because through all of this work we've done, she was also abused by her father. So I was abused by her dad. And I don't think it's that she didn't believe me. I just think it would have taken too much to like too much healing on her part, right? To venture down or to even open that conversation. And so it was shut. I never spoke about it. My body experienced it.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I was in that counselor's office that day, she said, "Well, let's just say it out loud. Let's get a group of people together." And so I got a group of 5 men together because my mom, I don't know if any of your listeners can feel this, but if my mom speaks English, I speak German. Like my mom and I we don't communicate the same. We don't feel the same. We just like pass in the night. Like we just don't necessarily get one another. And so in those situations, I trusted men, right? Like my dad was my guy. I loved my dad so much. And so I got a group of men together and I said it out loud for the first time. And that was the beginning of me understanding that substance has never been the problem. Substance was the solution to the problem. And all of the 23 people that I was in that facility with felt exactly the same way. After I shared it out loud to the main group that night, when there were women and men there, I had a woman come up to me afterwards and say, "Jennifer, I was raped when I was 16 and you're the first person I ever told." And that was the moment that I realized, like, oh, this isn't unique to me. Like substance is a solution for all of us. And many of us sitting in that room had kept it quiet, had kept it silent. And our body was telling this story that the only way we could come to a conclusion was to use substance. Like it's the only way that we could live in our bodies was to use substance. And that was the moment that I started to realize that I walked in these doors to figure out how to save my son. And I was leaving understanding that the only way to save my son was to save myself.
Jeez. What happened when you went home and you talked to your son about what you had learned about yourself?
So that was interesting because my son didn't get sober for 3 years after I got sober. And to be honest with you, when I first came home, nobody was super interested yet in what I had learned. Like they were still pretty mad, right? Specifically my children, my husband, like I say this to people that are getting sober. Like it was no, we weren't having the time of our lives for probably the first year to 18 months after I got sober. When I first got home, they didn't want me to use, but they also didn't like me very much. So they were just kind of walking on eggshells. And then after probably 9 months to a year, they thought, okay, maybe she's going to stay sober. And so the resentments really started to come out. Right. They started to say what they needed to say to me for all of those years. And so it was hard. It was a really hard time. And my son obviously was still using. And so there was a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of things that he said to me that were devastating. Right. Things like, I prefer you as a drug addict. I hate you, right? A lot of those things. And so I didn't really have the opportunity to share my heart with him too much. His life was in crisis. He was at the tail end of his use. And so I don't think there's an addict on this planet that will say they were, living the dream at the tail end of their addiction. Like it is when the weight starts bearing down and crisis starts happening, and the consequences are now outweighing the benefits. And so I didn't really get to share too much with him until he got sober in September of 2020. And we started kind of sharing our heart with each other about the experiences that we had had and why we chose substance and all of those things.
That is so beautiful that you were able to circle back and do that and have that honest conversation with your son after you've both been on a very, very different journeys.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to the early 2000s and the prescription of opioids. Was that a topic of conversation as you're working through your addiction? If you are at a center and you're working with a group, I'm just very curious, because now we realize that drugs like that are for a very small window for very specific reasons. And we didn't know that back then. And I'm just wondering how did you process that? Because you legitimately had a medical condition that required pain medication. You didn't do anything wrong. You were ill. So talk to me about how you deal with the emotions of that we as a country and a world said, oh yeah, they're fine. They're not addictive. And now we have this problem all over the world.
So first of all, I think that my doctors didn't prescribe. I think they prescribed me those medications because they literally didn't know how to help me, right? It was a matter. So I'm still to this day, I deal with chronic pain. That was one of the reasons why it took me so long to get sober, is I was so fearful of like, how am I going to deal with my chronic pain without painkillers, right? And I, especially in the early 2000s, without the information that we have today, I do believe that my doctors weren't, I don't think they ultimately were trying to cause pain in my life, right? But pain nonetheless. Yes. And there is, what I think the trauma that I carry with me is, there is so much shame that has come from my hospital experiences, my ER experiences, the way people spoke to me after I was addicted, right? When that wasn't the goal. That wasn't how I planned on this happening, but it was like nobody wanted to take any responsibility. All of a sudden I was the dirtbag, right? And the medical field didn't want to take any responsibility with me about how we got here. And I think that's the most challenging thing about that experience for me. I mean, I was so overprescribed. I mean, it would blow you away to know what I was being prescribed on a monthly basis. And I think it was fine until all of a sudden we started. I mean, I got sober in 2017. And so from 2003 till 2017, we learned a lot about opioids, right?
Mhm.
And so I think by the time I started, near the end of my addiction, there was some panic about how we got here and what was being prescribed. But they had been prescribing me that amount for so long that it got to the point where it's like, I can't prescribe this anymore for you, right? Although I know that I helped get us here.
Right.
I never took anything that I wasn't prescribed in all of those years. Um, and so, and I think if I'm honest, that I also kind of saw the writing on the wall. I knew
Mhm.
and had a lot of fear that this was changing. Our beliefs in this was changing, and one day I was going to be denied these drugs that I had been taking for all of these years. Um, it's interesting because I still have occasionally these thoughts of being angry about it. And my husband is the one that kind of helps me he's like, they did the very best that I have anger for the doctor that, so when I had brain surgery, this is a crazy story. The neurosurgeon who did my brain surgery retired 2 weeks after because he had Parkinson's.
Oh,
So I go through periods of time where it's like I have anger for that. And then I have anger for sort of the journey of being prescribed opioids. But this is the thing. And this is where I sit today. Somebody asked me one time, like, you can have one of two things, but you can't have them both. You have to choose it. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, you can have the childhood that you needed, the life that you needed. You're not in chronic pain. Like, you have the most beautiful, all of these things happened as you wish they had. Or you can have your life today. Because what I know is that the only reason I have the life that I have today is because I went through what I did as a child, because my dad was an alcoholic, because I had a brain tumor that turned into chronic pain, right? Because I suffered with addiction. That's why my life is the way that it is today. And I can't have gratitude for that life and stay in a place of being angry and upset about how the rest of my life unfolded.
That's such a good point. Um, because I think sometimes when things happen to us, and we are justified to feel anger,
Yeah.
um, once you get that permission slip, it's hard to kind of
Yeah.
say, okay, I'm done now. I'm good. But you're right in what you say about those physicians did not intend for that to happen. And they did not have, I read um, some articles about how opioids made their way through the approval process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's stunning, really. Um, and so they didn't have the information that they needed. They were being told that these drugs were safe and fine, and um, but in terms of your long-term healing, at some point, I guess you just anger is such a heavy load to bear. You just have to put it down because you can't pick up anything else as long as you're carrying it.
No, and I think that message, there's a thread in my whole life about that message, right? Um, because there have been, lots of different situations, specifically in my childhood, where I was powerless over the things that were happening to me. And the anger that I carried for so long about those burdens was the reason why ultimately I chose substance as a solution. And it wasn't until I got sober. I remember I'd been sober for about, I think, 3 months or so. And I had this epiphany about that anger that I had carried, whether it was about my sexual abuse with my grandfather or my dad's alcoholism or my mom, what felt like her inability to protect me. Those
Mhm.
were really sort of the pieces that I held. And when I was about 3 months sober, I realized that the power that I was giving away by not forgiving these people in my life and holding on to this anger, the power that I was giving away every single day. Like, my grandfather was influencing still. He had been dead for decades. He was still influencing every decision I made in my life because I was holding on to this anger. And the day that I forgave those people in my life, and ultimately, look, I say this, if my grandfather were alive today, I am not breaking bread with him. Forgiveness does not look like, oh my gosh, let's have a relationship and let's just let bygones be bygones and move on. Like, that's not the kind of forgiveness I'm talking about. The forgiveness I'm talking about is that I forgive him and I release the power and control that he has over my life through this piece of anger.
Yeah.
Right. And that, I think, was one of the most pivotal moments that happened in my early recovery and really has allowed me to have a period of long-term sobriety.
So many listeners who might be struggling with addiction feel a sense of isolation. And you had mentioned that early on in our conversation. What would you say to them as they sit alone, wherever they are, about feeling isolated and the illusion of isolation because there's so many people who can help them?
Yeah. Isolation is tricky because first of all, I don't know an addict, using addict that does not isolate. It is required when we're talking about our shame, right? So most of us in the middle of an addiction, we feel like a square peg in a round hole. We feel like we don't belong. We feel like people don't really like the authentic version of us. They want us to be this ideal version of us that they've created in their mind. Many times this happens like with parents, right? If I'm a child and I feel like I can't show up and be with my parents, I'm going to isolate because I feel like they want me to be this ideal version of myself. And so the only time I can really be authentic is when I'm isolating. And it's really easy to do when I'm high, right?
Yeah.
So isolation is it is where the devil lives. It is where the darkness lives in sort of this active addiction piece. Maybe you've heard, there's a guy who does a TED Talk that says the opposite of addiction is connection. And I believe that with my full chest, right? And it wasn't until, and this is the thing, when I was first getting sober, who I wanted to connect with was my people, my other alcoholics and addicts, the other people that understood my depth and level of shame. The people that I didn't have to tell them that that's not who I was in real life, right? Like I didn't have to explain to them that I was acting outside of my core beliefs and core values when I used substance because they knew that already.
Right.
Like my people. And those were the people that I needed to connect with early on in my recovery. And so if I were to speak with the person that is isolating right now, that is still using substance, that is in a place that understands that this is not a long-term solution, that there might be a problem, that I might need to do something about this, I would say to them, take a baby step and start finding your people. Whether that's in the rooms of AA or NA, whether you hate that and you want to go to an outpatient treatment or an inpatient treatment or smart recovery or some other group of people that are struggling with the same things that you're struggling with. Find your people. I could not have even begun to do this work unless I had that step one was to find my people.
Mm-hmm. How did your family and friends, when you're early in your recovery and the people that you want to be around are the people you know have walked your path with you?
Yeah.
How did your family and friends react to that was your need?
Yeah. Tricky. I mean, it's tricky, right? I am so grateful that my husband always has understood from day one that my recovery is the most important thing in my life. Not because I don't love him so much or my children so much, but because everything that I put above my recovery, I am going to lose. So if I put a job in front of my recovery, if I put my husband or my children in front of my recovery, I will lose every single one of those things. And so my recovery has to be the top priority, which means if I get squirrely at 7:00 in the evening and we're supposed to be on a date, I got to go. I got to go to a meeting. And I do that because I love him so much.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I first got sober, I think it was interesting. I think there was some, I do the work I do today because of an experience that I had with my husband. So we were, I don't know, I think I was 6 months sober or so, and we're driving down the street and I am on cloud nine. We call this a pink cloud in the rooms of AA. Like I was so happy. I finally felt like I was free of substance and not like physically dependent anymore. I had met my people. I was connecting with them, which was something I missed so much. And I was just telling him about this experience. And he looked over at me with a dead face and said, "I'm so happy for you, but I've been doing this for 14 years too. What am I supposed to do?"
Oh.
And I was just thrown because I had never looked at it from that perspective before. And I do think there were periods of time early on where he was jealous about the experience that I was having, right? That I was healing. And he didn't really see a space for him to do that work. So it was tricky for a while. But I think, one of the things that I can say about my family is that we just never quit, right? We just never quit on each other. And so we kind of just, and we went through different seasons of early recovery. Seasons like I was sharing earlier where they didn't really say anything, and then their resentment started coming out and some of those experiences. But for sure, I think there was some, I think jealousy is the word for him, that he wasn't having the same relief necessarily that I was having. And he wanted to be mad at me, and yet I'm the one having the best time of my life, which is so crazy to hear that one of the best times of my life was early recovery. And really it was because I was finding connection and I found my people. And I had this new sort of healing going on inside of me. But addiction is so often misunderstood from a family perspective. The truth is I didn't get here by myself. I was the one that was using the substance, but there is no way that I used substance for as long as I did without my husband contributing to that pattern and to that, whether it was availability or whether he just took all of the hard things off of my plate so that I could just focus on being an addict, right? And mine was complicated because I had a medical condition. And so that also complicated sort of his enabling. But as a family, we've got to look at this and say, okay, am I contributing to the dynamic of this? I like to talk about it from a dance floor perspective, if you will. So like, we waltzed as a family. That was just the dance that we did. And I kind of knew I didn't like to waltz, but I waltzed nonetheless because everybody else was doing it. And they told me that that's the dance that that was the ideal version of me, right? The ideal version of me waltzes. And then when I got sober and was in treatment for a while, I learned that I like to tango. Like the authentic version of me is a tangoer. So can you imagine when I got home, everyone's waltzing and I'm tangoing? Not pretty.
Yeah.
And the message that is being sent to me is, we want you to be sober, but you need to waltz. That's what we do as a family. We waltz. And the message that I now share with families is, I don't waltz. So there's only one way I'm going to be on your dance floor and waltz, and that's high. The only other option for me is to get off this dance floor altogether and not be on there with you. And so what I mean by our families contributing to the solution or the problem is the problem is the waltz. We've all got to get off this dance floor. and I'm not going to
Yeah.
tango and you're not going to waltz, and we're going to figure out what dance we can do together where we can be the authentic versions of ourselves and understand that we all were contributing to this dance on this dance floor.
Yeah. That's such a great way to put it. It brings such an understanding to it, especially the family contributions. Talk to me about the intergenerational component of addiction. And I mean, I look at my family, my husband's family. We all, there's stories. There's too many stories.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about kind of the generational trauma that carries forward year over year, and then it's sitting with us, and we got to try to take care of it and resolve it.
So my grandfather that sexually abused me was a twin, and both of them abused children. So you have to make some assumptions in that they were also abused. So just that alone, right? And I don't know if it happened too many generations before that, but just that alone would be 5 generations of sexual abuse in my family. Yeah. And on top of those, so the statistics say that 1 out of every 4 little girl and 1 out of every 6 little boy that has raised in addiction is being sexually abused. So the combination of addiction and sexual abuse runs rampant in our society. And I have been able to find 4 generations down my mom's side and 4 generations down my dad's side that have had addiction. So think about that for a moment. At least on one side, I have addiction and sexual abuse, and the other side is just addiction. You talk about waltzing, like my family waltzed in addiction and sexual abuse, right? And the crazy thing about this is that I remember when I was about 3 or 4 years old, sitting on my mom was doing my hair. We were sitting in the bathroom, and I told her I had this funny feeling inside of me. And she said to me at the time, like, everybody has that funny feeling, because that had become her truth, because she had been abused, because her dad had been abused. Like, this was normal. Right? And her bodied in the sense that she couldn't remember what had happened to her. Her body was protecting her from the trauma. And so that carried into not necessarily protecting me, because she didn't have any of these strong memories, and because all of these things were normal. So for instance, we used to have this thing called sus prizes, where he would go to the store and get like meats and crackers and cheese and whatever. And we would have these in a bed.
Okay.
That felt very normal. Right? There were other things that if I shared with you, you would say, what are you even talking about? And it was normal. And that is how this thing happens generationally. Right? And the addiction itself, and first of all, there's the biology, right? So there's the way that my body responds to the substance. Then there's the normal. I mean, we had a house on a lake growing up, and it was just normal. 9 o'clock, and the adults are cracking one open. I don't remember a time where, like, not a day in my life where my dad didn't drink in the evening. So my dad was an incredibly functional alcoholic, very successful businessman. We had a great life from the outside looking in. And so, it wasn't like he was such an alcoholic that we were living in poverty and he didn't get up to go to work in the next day. And so everything was very normal. Everybody drank. Everybody I knew around, like all my parents' friends, all my family, everybody drank alcohol. And there were periods of time where I knew as a child that my dad was an alcoholic. Now, why? I can't really tell you. Like I just know the feeling that was inside of my body. But I look at my family now and even my nephews growing up, and still addiction is so in our blood. It is part of our blood that reigns. And so the people that are going to have to be sober are going to have to fight for it. It's not going to be something that just naturally, oh, we just choose not to use substance.
Yeah.
And that's how I understand. I did for a long time look at my parents' inability to break the chains of this thing as weakness. And obviously have gone through it now myself. I understand that it is a way more complex story than just simply don't drink.
Yeah. And that, sometimes in families, and I'm thinking about one family member in particular, in my own family, it just feels like untying a big ball of knots. And if you have a child who needs support in that very specific way, and you yourself have that moral injury, how are you going to untie all those knots so you can help your little girl untie hers?
Well,
it's
untying the knot only just breaks the surface of substance. Like substance isn't even the biggest part of untying the knot. Right. So that's when I say substance is not the problem. Substance is not the problem. Substance is the solution to the problem. I'm using substance because of the knot.
Yes.
To deal with the knot.
Yes.
So just not using, I still have a knot.
Right.
And that's the part about generational trauma that makes this so difficult is, okay, I can stop using substance is actually the easy part. As hard as it is. It's not easy, by the way, but it's the easy part of then now I have to untangle this knot.
Mm-hmm.
Sober.
So leaving addiction, moving towards your sober living, talk to me how that was for your own personal identity. You talked about the waltz and the tango. How did it feel kind of rebuilding yourself in the authentic way you discovered yourself to be in treatment? And how did the family respond to that, like in terms of your identity and where you wanted to go with this?
I think this is a twofold question for me, because the sober part, like the identity of who I was going to be as a human being moving forward, became very clear to me early on. So ironically enough, when I was 23 years old, I went to school to be a drug and alcohol counselor. This was long before I even took a substance in my whole life. So I knew I felt this passion, right, to help people because of my childhood and because of my experience. Then I had babies and I raised them, and then I became an addict, and that all kind of went. But I always had this heart to use my experience to help other people. I've been always one of those people that I needed to do something to make the world a better place through my experience. And so when I started to get sober, I knew immediately that I wanted to do something that helped people. And I had been on long-term disability because of my medical condition. And so I pretty quickly went from, I got to get off disability. I got to figure out how to, it was important for my mental health to figure out, okay, how am I going to do life and be a member of society? And so I very quickly started to I went to work for the outpatient program that I actually went through when I started my sobriety journey. And moved up and actually ended up being on the executive team there. And I think from a family perspective, my family looking in, I think they were proud, right? I think I think it helped too, as I built trust with them, that I was, doing something positive, that I was passionate about, that I was working in the field. Like, I think there was a lot of that kind of transpired as far as my work. And I worked there for about 6 years, and then started my own business doing my life coaching work. So it's always from early on. I remember having a conversation with the gentleman that owned the facility, probably 3 months sober, that's like, I need to do this work. I need to help people. I need to do something that is giving back. Like, it was one of the things that sort of was a living amends. I was trying to give back to the world what I had taken so much from, and somehow make it okay from that perspective. I think the other part of this, though, is that the narratives that I had told myself for 44 years of my life about my childhood and about who I was and who my mom was and who my dad was, right? Those narratives had to change, because those narratives are what was fueling my continued substance use, right? The fact that my mom abandoned me or didn't protect me no longer served this new version of me. And that work, I have been sober for 8.5 years. That work continues, because those narratives were so rooted inside of me that oftentimes when I'm not really intentional about them, I can start slipping back into those narratives. And those narratives are what keep me angry and depressed, without gratitude, without hope, without joy. And so that is the part that I think is still challenging. I will never forget the day that I was in my therapist's office and I was talking to her about something. And I realized that the narrative that my mother was this evil person she's absolutely not evil, by the way, but this childhood narrative that I had, that she didn't protect me and all of the things, was keeping me from my own peace and serenity and joy. And they weren't factual. They weren't factual for me anymore. Right? But who was I when I gave those narratives up? Like, all of a sudden I had to take responsibility for my own truth, because I could no longer blame my truth on my mom. And that's the part of this that has been an absolute journey. It ebbs and flows, but it is ultimately what gives me the most peace to continue to do that work.
Taking 100% responsibility for your life is, I think, one of the biggest lessons I've had, for, because then you have no one to blame.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, it was you. This is why I'm here.
Well, it's tricky. That's tricky too, when you come from a space of childhood trauma.
Right.
Like, that's been tricky, because I don't want to take any responsibility for what happened to me, in the sense that I was a small child, right? You get in this place where you can almost take too much responsibility for what people did to you when you had no control over that, right? So it's this weird balance of understanding that I was powerless in those situations, but now I have the power to take responsibility for what happened afterwards.
Exactly. And you have the power and responsibility to choose how you're going to walk forward from that. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
For the loved ones who are listening, I'm thinking about the parents, the partners, the children, your friends, and they are watching someone they love deeply be lost in the depths of addiction. What is the single most important piece of advice that you can offer them, both about, not necessarily recovery, but about setting boundaries and practicing compassion?
Yeah. So first of all, I think the most important thing in this journey, well, there's two. One is finding your peace, right? Which sounds really easy. I get it. I'm sure there's people listening right now going, yeah, my peace was gone so long ago that I don't even know how to begin to get it back. But I promise you there's a journey and there's a way to get there. So finding your own peace, and then and boundaries equal finding your peace. Boundaries are to protect my own peace, not to control somebody or punish somebody. So that's really important when we're talking about boundaries. And then the second question is, I can find my peace, but then I've got to start asking the question of myself: am I contributing to the solution, or am I contributing to the problem? Now, I can't control an outcome, but I can decide if my behaviors and actions are contributing to a potential solution, or are continuing, if you will, waltzing on this dance floor that is just contributing to the same old dynamic, right? So I would say a couple of things. One, if you aren't an addict and you need to get into your addict's brain, I'm your neighborhood addict. The most important thing about boundaries is that you absolutely keep 100% of the time what you say you're going to do. So I try to not live in the black and white anymore in my life, but boundaries do need to be black and white because of this brain, this addict brain. So if you have a child that's living in your home and you say they need to be home by 12 o'clock, and it's 12:03, and you're like, what's 3 minutes? 3 minutes is a lot to this brain, because what this says to me is, okay, 3 minutes today, 5 minutes tomorrow, but soon, 20 minutes in a week. And before you know it, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you can't figure out why your loved one won't just hold to the boundary, right? This is the other thing about boundaries. When you set it, you best believe they're going to try to run right through it. Oftentimes as family members, we try to set a boundary and we just want them to hold to it so that we don't have to do the hard work of setting or staying firm. Before you set a boundary, you should already expect that you're going to have to hold to it. So you need to decide, is this boundary something that I can hold to 100% of the time? And if the answer is no, for instance, oftentimes we're like, well, if you're not home by 12:03, then you're leaving. I'm kicking you out of the house. Oftentimes I'm not prepared to actually do that. So I got to lower the boundary to find something that I can hold to 100% of the time. So an example like that, let's say if you are home at 12, not at 12 o'clock, then you're not going to have access to the car anymore, my car that I own. And I know that I can hold to that 100% of the time. That's where we start. We start small and we work our way up. Oftentimes families come in and they start threatening things and trying to control outcomes through their boundaries. And it is a disaster all the way around. And it is contributing to the problem, not to the solution. The second thing that I would say is that, similarly to what I said when I was trying to get sober, the most important thing you can do is start finding your people, right? Because as a mama of an addict, all of a sudden, you really can't talk to your neighbor because your neighbor doesn't understand what's going on, right? And you have so much shame about what you're walking through and so much angst and so much that all of a sudden your world just starts getting really, really small. Relationships with friends start changing, right? You start isolating because you're losing these connections. And so as important as it is for the addict, it is also equally important for the family members to start finding your people. That's one of the things that I do now is this coaching call once a week, and it brings people from all over the country, North Carolina, Chicago, Virginia, Idaho, where I'm from. And the goal is, yes, I want to learn a little bit about how I contribute to the solution, but the biggest outcome I'm hoping for is that I'm building a community of people, like-minded people that understand what it's like to be a loved one to somebody that suffers with addiction.
And I mean, that's the true purpose that we take from our pain is to pass it along to somebody else and help them carry their load.
Yeah.
looking back at the woman who was struggling with addiction, what is one lesson or insight that you wish you could have whispered in your ear years ago?
That's a great question. You're going to do this, like you can do this, right?
Yeah.
That God didn't leave you all those years ago. Like you're going to find sort of a connection and a relationship that's going to help you walk through this. Like there's so many things that I wish I could tell that version. You don't have to make every decision based and rooted in fear. She was a broken, traumatized, trying to do the very best that she could with her life. And it wasn't enough, right? It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for her kids. It wasn't enough for her family. And maybe most importantly, it wasn't enough for her. But it wasn't until I started unraveling the ball sober, that I started to learn that I was more than just that little 3-year-old that was being sexually abused.
Which is why your work is so important, because how many more of us are walking around and we haven't shared that part of ourselves to heal.
Yeah.
And we hold it in.
Yeah.
I have to read a couple of quotes that I pulled from you. Shame thrives in silence. The moment you speak your truth, you begin to dismantle the prison you built for yourself. Oh my God. Like, that's amazing. Yeah. And it just like, it stopped me in my tracks. And I took some time, because I always like, when I have a podcast, to take the time in the morning to kind of look at the guest, think about what I want to talk about. And I always wait until the morning, not because I'm a procrastinator, but I am a procrastinator, but because I just like to have it fresh in my mind and just get a real feel for who the person's going to be, so that we can have a great chat.
Yeah.
When I read that stopped me in my tracks. And the other one is, addiction is not a life sentence. It's a detour that, with intentional redirection, can lead you to your truest self. I mean, Jennifer, you're doing the important work here. Oh. You're spreading this message that you can come back from this darkness, and you can unravel that ball of yarn with the knots. And it's not easy, and you're going to face hurdles as you go through it. Tell our listeners how they can find your beautiful work and connect with you. And we will have all of this in the show notes when we release the episode. But I really want you to tell them how they can find you. I feel like our listeners are going to want to reach out.
My website is www.riseaddictionlc.com. And there's an opportunity under the Let's Work Together to just connect, right? And for me, I hope that the message that I'm sending is, whether we ever work together professionally, connection is the cure to all of this, right? Finding your people. And so if you want to connect with me, but we're not in a place to work together professionally, please do so, right? I just, more than anything in this world, want to bring like-minded people together that have suffered. Like, compassion is the root of the word compassion is rooted in suffering with others. That's what compassion means, right? And in this world today, more than ever, I believe that we need to suffer with others more, right? Yes. Coming from a place of compassion. And so even if you just want to chat, right? Even if you just heard this and said, hey, I just want to have a conversation with you. I just want to pick your brain. I just want to do whatever it is. Please, please, please reach out to me on my website. I also have on Instagram and Facebook, I have Rise Addiction Life Coaching, and I also have my own personal on there. So you can always personally reach out as well. And this is the thing. We do not and cannot do this by ourselves. If we could, we would have done it by now.
Right.
Right?
So true.
We
Yeah.
would have by now, right? None of us are suffering because we like to suffer. We're suffering because we cannot do it alone. We either don't have the resources or we need the connection or something is going on. And so even if you don't reach out to me, find your people. There, I shared my quote about healing from addiction, but this is the thing. I'm living the life that I have today because it is so much better than the life that I used to have. Like, I'm not a martyr, right? Like, if I wasn't living my dreams sober, I wouldn't be sober. And that's true too when it comes to having a loved one that's an addict. Like, we don't have to suffer. Not to say it's going to be easy, and not to say that we're not going to have hurdles like you spoke of, but we don't have to suffer like this. And so my message is that there is light, there is hope, there is peace, there is joy. We just have to make the first step to get it. And that is find your people.
I love that. One of the things that I focus on with the people that I work with is gratitude. And so today I am really, really super thankful that I got to talk to you about this. You gave me some new perspectives on addiction that I didn't have before. And I know our listeners, it will resonate with them as well. Jennifer, you keep doing what you're doing because the world needs you.
Thank you so much. This has been such a joy today.
It has been. I hope you'll come back and chat again because I know as your work continues to evolve, there'll be new topics. So please reach out and tell me if you'd like to have another chat.
We're writing a book, so I would love to come back after the book is finished and chat
I
about
would love to have you.
Yeah,
I would love to have you. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Such a joy. Thank you so much.